We are going to talk today about how COVID-19 impacted on SEANUTS II study in Malaysia. But before we start, you have a question about how COVID has impacted Malaysians and what are the nutrition challenges among Malaysian children. So what I'm going to share with you is a study from UNICEF. They have done a very quick survey somewhere between May to September of 2020 last year to look at the impact of COVID and particularly the movement control order that was in Malaysia, how it has impacted the low-income households. And in this slide, what you can see is that they are trying to show here that the average income of the families have actually reduced in comparison to the previous year, 2019. So in May, income was much reduced, just immediately after the MCO, and then by September, income had increased again. And here, income increased by about 23% post-lockdown, but compared to 2019 is still about 9% lower. So among the low-income households in Malaysia, I think they are greatly impacted, and these have also changed their dietary choices. If you look at these pie charts here, you can see that on average, these low-income families, they are spending more money on foods like eggs, rice, and instant noodles as well. And then expenses on so-called more expensive or luxury food such as snacks and sweets have reduced. More importantly, we must take note here is that consumption of fruit has also reduced. Just because people's income are lower and then the food like fruits are so expensive. So this is not a very good sign of the dietary choices. But because of the impact of COVID, they have no choice but to go ahead and just spend on what they can afford, more like filling the stomach rather than thinking about the nutrition impact. So here, when we look at the comparison between the lowest income, which is below 2,000 ringgit, versus the slightly higher income groups among these low income families, more than 2,000 ringgit, you can see that the households with the lowest income, they mostly spend on food like instant noodles and eggs, because from eggs you can get protein, but it's also still cheap and quite affordable. But if you look at the top where you see protein and rice, where the prices are a bit more expensive, then you can see that the slightly higher income people, more than 2,000 ringgit, they are taking more. So basically the lowest income groups are eating less nutritious food. Okay, so we talked about protein. Overall, protein food sources consumption has reduced, and it's reduced by quite a lot. And these are on the second slide here, in the middle of the slide here, what you can see is what are the reasons people give for reducing protein consumption. From the bottom here, the most people say is that protein foods are more expensive. So it's more like they can't afford it anymore, because at the same time, you can also see here the third most commonly cited reason is that they have less income. So overall, about 30% of the households actually spend less on protein. All right, so as a summary from the UNICEF study, what they have found is that food insecurity is quite prevalent among the low-income families, and this is because their finances have been affected. Many of them are not working, and without working, they don't have an income. So in terms of food security, they have had to reduce their intake of rice, they have had to reduce their intake of meats, and then they change their selection like fish and meat, which is more expensive, to things like canned sardines or eggs and vegetables, which are cheaper. And they also have had to ration food among themselves, and they also reduce the number of heavy meals and instead substitute with certain types of snacks that are cheap, as well as instant noodles. And many of them, because we are now all stuck at home, then we tend to cook more at home rather than eat out, because of the situation of COVID, and in this case for the low income families, because of their reduced income as well. So the story for the lowest income groups in Malaysia, I think especially those living in urban areas, is quite sad. If you can imagine, if you are a low income family, but if you live in a kampong like village where behind you you have your, you know, your small little plot of land to grow your own vegetables or rear your own chicken, then you will be able to access food that you grow yourself. But for urban households that are low income, it is not as good.